August 23, 2010, police responded to a simple welfare check that had been called earlier in the day. They were checking on Gareth Williams, a mathematician who hadn't shown up for work in about a week. Williams was an incredibly shy and private man, never purposely drawing any attention to himself or his dealings. The most his coworkers knew about him was that he enjoyed cycling, usually opting to bike his way to work, but otherwise he kept to himself. He took great pride in his work and was incredibly reliable, sticking to his schedules as if his life depended on it. So when he abruptly stopped showing up to work a few days earlier, his coworkers and his sister began to worry. Williams wasn't the type to break from schedule, or to not call in if he was going to miss a day. But it wasn't until his sister called into his work that his coworkers called the police, asking them to stop by his apartment he'd been renting for 10 years. They hoped that the police would call them back, letting them know that Gareth had been too ill to answer their calls over the past couple days, that he was on the mend and he would be back into work soon. But they never could have expected what the police found there, or at least that's what they told the world. Welcome back to another episode of Dreading. Today we will be going over the incredibly suspicious death of Welsh mathematician Gareth Williams. This topic was suggested to us by one of our longtime subscribers who has been fascinated by this case since 2010, and I hope I'm able to make this video to their liking. Before we begin, if there's a case you would like to see explored on this channel, let me know by either leaving a comment or emailing me at dreading.official@gmail.com. All of my videos are suggestion-based, and I prioritize topics that are sent in. Also, as a considerable amount of videos on this channel have recently been struck by YouTube, please consider supporting the channel via Patreon. With all of that said, let us begin. This video is brought to you by Raycon. When researching these stories for this channel, I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I go through everything I can on a subject. That way I can provide you with the most in-depth coverage of a story that I can. For the Aaron Hernandez video, I listened to The Truth About Aaron, My Journey to Understand My Brother. Or for the Foxcatcher Farm video, I listened to Foxcatcher by Mark Schultz and David Thomas. But listening would not have been as easy or as comfortable had I not been using Raycon Everyday Earbuds. Raycon Everyday Earbuds are the perfect earbuds to use no matter what I'm doing. Whether I'm working out, driving, or cleaning up my office, they provide a high-quality sound for up to 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. Their passive noise isolation makes it easier to focus on my work. And I love that with just one tap of my earbud, I can answer or reject any distracting calls. Once again, Raycon is partnering with my channel to provide listeners with an amazing deal. If you're interested in trying Raycon Everyday Earbuds today, you can click on the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/dreading to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. That's 15% off Raycon's everyday earbuds that have over 50,000 5-star reviews. I cannot thank Raycon enough for choosing to partner with this channel and for providing me with such high quality audio. Again, you can click on the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/dreading to get 15% off your Raycon purchase. With that said, let us begin. Who Gareth was before his death is a strangely contentious question, as different media outlets would go on to report radically different things. However, people who knew Gareth would go on record saying he was a mathematical genius, but had a hard time dealing with other people. In school, his mind put him leaps and bounds ahead of the other children. At the age of 10, he was moved into high school, and by the age of 13, he began taking classes at Bangor University. But his age put him at a stark disadvantage amongst his peers. No one wanted to be friends with a child, especially a child who was more intelligent than they were. He was too young to be seen as a contemporary, so his classmates isolated him. A former classmate, Dylan Perry, would describe Gareth as being naive to the world. Due to his young age, he was more apt to believe whatever he was told, especially if it came from someone he believed was an authority figure. At times, his teenage classmates would use this to their advantage, pranking the younger teen. His home life was another story. Gareth got along well with his family, as they provided him with nothing but love and support. Despite his great intellect, his father got him into cycling, as he was a part of the Holyhead Cycling Club, and during their rides, they would talk for hours. However, his father would admit that Gareth never put himself out there. He went so far as to state he was a really lovely young man, but wasn't a great conversationalist. Gareth wasn't the sort to go to the pub after a race. At the tender age of 18, Gareth would leave home for the first time to begin a PhD program at Manchester University. His primary focus was on computer games, as he had enjoyed them throughout his life. However, his life would take a turn. At the age of 21, he was approached by the British Security Services. One of his professors, Terry Hewitt, would recall that, quote, Gareth came into my office and said, I'm going to GCHQ. He had to tell me as I was his referee for his vetting, unquote. Gareth worked for GCHQ for 10 years, specifically working to break codes for the government. He would buy a small apartment near work, which he spent little time in. It was barely furnished, and seemed to be filled with only the most simple of furniture that was hardly ever used. Despite earning a good living, his home was barren and barely decorated, as he spent very little time there. His free time was spent thinking about work, and his work became his entire life. But after a decade, he made the decision to leave his position and work for the Secret Intelligence Service, more commonly known as MI6. Working for MI6 was one of the first and only times in Gareth's young life where he was amongst people who were either as smart or smarter than he was. He was constantly surrounded by brilliant men and women who challenged his own intelligence in a way he had never experienced before, and had to intercept, monitor, and analyze email and telephone calls from around the world. What exactly Williams did while working for the Secret Intelligence Service has been up for debate, as coworkers were not at liberty to say, and Gareth never told friends or family. However, some colleagues who have since left the MI6 have stated that Williams worked on software to assemble, search, and analyze data from foreign countries. His job was to find patterns within the data, decipher their meanings, and potentially stop any terrorist attacks. Williams was reported to have helped stop what is commonly referred to as the liquid bomb plot, where a group of British radicals had planned to detonate homemade explosives on 7 flights to major North American cities. Williams had been able to intercept emails and phone calls between the perpetrators, ultimately foiling their plans to kill countless people. However, despite reports from his colleagues that he loved his work, his sister told a different story. According to her, Gareth was dissatisfied with his position. He regretted his choice to join the MI6 and was planning to go back to work for the GCHQ, but he would never make it back, as just a month before he was set to leave, he would be found dead in his apartment under extremely suspicious circumstances. When the police arrived at Gareth's small apartment on August 23, 2010, all was quiet. It didn't appear that anything was amiss, although it didn't appear that Gareth was home at all. The only thing that struck the police as odd was the fact that the heat in the apartment was incredibly high. The home felt as if it was cooking, but otherwise everything seemed normal. Too normal. The home seemed staged, with everything perfectly in its place except for Gareth's phone charger, laptop, and wallet. They were found on the ground, in front of his couch, as if placed there by a third party. It wasn't until they entered the bathroom, attached to Gareth's bedroom, that they found a perplexing sight. In the middle of the bath lay a red, padlocked North Face duffel bag. The bag was clearly filled with something, and given its strange positioning, the police feared the worst. However, the bathroom itself was spotless. There was no sign of a struggle, and it appeared that the room had been completely cleaned, save for the random bag in the middle of the bath. That seemed to comfort the responding officers who entered the bathroom, as they held on to hope that Gareth had simply decided to quit his job without informing his coworkers and family. Perhaps he had gone on a short vacation and the duffel bag in the middle of the bathtub had simply been forgotten, along with his other personal possessions next to the couch. Whatever they were expecting when they opened the duffel bag isn't what they found. William's naked, decomposing body was found in the bag, and shockingly, the key to the lock was found directly under his body. Because the heat in the apartment had been turned on so high, Gareth's body was in an advanced stage of decomposition, so much so, it couldn't be properly determined how long he'd been dead for, or even how he died. Immediately, the apartment was cordoned off. Because of Gareth's work, the scene was guarded by armed security, but that was only the beginning. The bathroom itself had absolutely no clues as to what happened to Gareth. There were no traces of any DNA, fingerprints, or footprints at the scene, not even Gareth's. It seemed that, at the very least, the scene had been cleaned thoroughly, and not just by anyone, but by someone with some forensic knowledge. Despite Gareth's body being found in the duffel bag, it too yielded no evidence that could allude to what happened. The zipper and the padlock had no fingerprints or DNA on it, and any evidence that had been left on the key was degraded by the body's decomposition. There were were no scratches on the inside of the bag as well, leading to many believing that Gareth either got in the bag willingly or had already been unconscious when placed in the bag. But unless Gareth had gotten into the bag, then somehow managed to clean the entire bathroom, ensuring no DNA, fingerprints, or forensic evidence could be found, the idea that he had entered the bag willingly was out of the question. Someone had to have been in the home after Gareth's death to clean up. That much was obvious. The coroner examined the body and once again found little evidence of any crime. Gareth had no poison in his system. There were no offensive wounds on his body. Whatever happened here, there was very little struggle or resistance by Gareth. However, they determined that he'd been dead for at least a week, which meant that had he been poisoned, it was unlikely that it would still be in his system. That, alongside the advanced decomposition of the body, made determining anything incredibly hard to do. He couldn't confidently say what had happened to the young man, beyond the fact that he was dead. The autopsy would result in finding that there was no obvious cause of death. Every new piece of information resulted in more questions than answers to those investigating the death. But that would only get worse, because Gareth worked for MI6, the heads of the Secret Intelligence Service and Metropolitan Police met to discuss how the police would handle the investigation. Gareth had access to information that was highly classified and, should it get in the wrong hands, could lead to disaster. Plans had been set in motion months in advance to stop terrorists, government secrets, and the like hung in the balance, and MI6 was adamant that they be in control of the investigation. Williams had also worked with the U.S. National Security Agency and the FBI, and they too felt that they should be involved in the investigation to make sure that certain information was kept quiet. The question of how the Metropolitan Police would handle the investigation didn't go well, with them determining that both agencies would look into the crime, doing two completely separate investigations. However, both investigations would be greatly disrupted, this time by public speculation. The very concept of an MI6 agent being killed under suspicious circumstances drew massive public attention. Had he been a spy working undercover and been found out by the mob? Had he double-crossed his country and been killed? Had an assassin come in from a foreign land and taken him out as part of a hit? The general speculation around the case made people feel as if they were part of a James Bond film, and led to an abundance of speculation and onlookers. Shortly after Gareth's death, the Sun newspaper ran a headline declaring, quote, "Murdered MI6 worker Gareth Williams was a secret transvestite who may have been killed by a gay lover. Cops found women's clothing that would fit Gareth in his flat in central London. It would be reported and circulated that Gareth owned thousands of dollars worth of women's clothing, particularly shoes, and that his home was filled with cocaine and bondage gear. They also claimed that Williams was known to pay escorts, perform in drag, and was a regular in sex clubs. In these articles, anonymous friends of Gareth would state that he was a well-known sex fiend who would do anything for a thrill. The landlady of the annex flat he had rented said she and her husband found him shouting for help on one occasion, with his hands tied to his bedposts. He claimed that he was just seeing if he could get free, but they believed that the act had been sexual in nature. The majority of this information was later found to be untrue, but these unsubstantiated claims would be regurgitated through various reports of the story, with many people believing them outright. The only claims that held any water was the fact that Gareth was gay and owned some women's clothing. But he had never used an escort, never went out dressed as a woman, never had a boyfriend, done recreational drugs, and he rarely drank. The agencies that he worked for ran extensive background and drug tests on him during the span of his employment, and had he so much as smoked weed recreationally, that would have led to his termination. The very idea that he had a secret double life was absurd, but that didn't stop tabloids from saying so. From all accounts, Gareth lived an extremely quiet life, and the mischaracterization of him in death was incredibly strange. Various other tabloids would post similar claims, assassinating Gareth's character to the point where many believed that his death, if it had been a murder, was deserved in some respect. Homeless people, drug addicts, sex workers, and gay individuals lived what many considered to be a dangerous lifestyle. Police themselves would classify any individual that fell under that umbrella to be at a high risk of falling victim to homicidal violence. The majority of the time, if a victim was found to be any of those things, the case would fall to the wayside and viewed as less of a priority. Similarly, the public cared less about crimes that happened to those individuals and in many regards would view the crime as being just a part of the person's life choices. These falsified stories and claims muddied the water greatly, to the point where to this day it is extremely challenging to research this case without stumbling into one of these false reports being stated uncritically. The The police felt, at least partially, that these stories had been planted in the media to make the case less interesting to the public. An MI6 agent being killed in a suspicious way was tantalizing to the public. People couldn't help but want to know everything about what had happened, and many individuals had become obsessed with the case. Blogs were being dedicated to theorizing about what had happened to Gareth, what government had killed him, and what national secrets he died protecting. Government conspiracies, spies, and a suspicious death was too intriguing to pass up. But if Gareth was mischaracterized and made to seem as if he lived a dangerous lifestyle, the vast majority of people will lose interest. Obviously, that was not the case, but the police had a hard time countering the narrative. Every time they put out a statement saying that there was no evidence to point to an ex-boyfriend killing him, the Sun and various other tabloids would put out more stories, claiming to have more insider information. Police suspected the stories were planted, but they had no idea who had done so, given how many different government intelligence agencies wanted to draw public attention away from the case. The two separate simultaneous investigations caused problems for both the police and the SIS. The Metropolitan Police needed to search Gareth's office, but the SIS blocked them from doing so, citing that his office was filled with classified data that they couldn't allow to get into the wrong hands. Similarly, when the SIS was revisiting the crime scene to assess different potential scenarios, they found that the police had taken items from the home, including the front door. Both agencies were refusing to work together and share information, seemingly content with sabotaging the other party as much as possible, seemingly forgetting that a man had died and deserved justice. The abrupt ending of the investigation left many people wondering what happened, and many people were dissatisfied with the result. However, in 2012, a coroner's inquest would begin and would reveal how shoddy the entire investigation had been. It was revealed that there was DNA found at the crime scene, notably on William's hand. However, instead of leading to the killer, it led back to one of the crime scene investigators, which meant that the entire crime scene had been compromised. It was also found that during the investigation, both police and the SIS had been deliberately sabotaging each other, keeping key information from the other agency and giving them false leads. Pictures had been deleted from Gareth's phone. Computer flash drives had been withheld. The entire investigation was, essentially, contaminated. The incredible amount of contaminated and tampered with evidence was so much that Fiona Wilcox, the coroner, publicly admonished every agency that had taken part in the investigation. She blamed everyone involved, from the forensics team to the police to the SIS, for either deliberately destroying the crime scene and making the case unsolvable, or being too inept to keep their jobs. She concluded that William's death had not been a suicide, nor did it have anything to do with his sexuality. Instead, based on all the evidence, she concluded that another party placed the bag containing Williams into the bath, and on the balance of probabilities, locked the bag. The coroner said that Williams was probably alive when he was put into the bag, and that he probably died shortly afterwards, either from CO2 poisoning or from a short-acting poison. This conclusion prompted the Metropolitan Police to reopen the investigation, and for the next year, they poured all over the available details. The courts mandated that the SIS work with the police and hand over all available evidence, regardless of classification. After a year's time, Metropolitan Police Deputy Assistant Commissioner Martin Hewitt held a press conference to announce that they had determined that Gareth, pause for drama, had locked himself inside the bag and that his death was just an accident. Tee-hee. The real question is, how did he lock himself inside the bag? So essentially, we've investigated ourselves, and upon further analysis, we found that we've done nothing wrong. This determination was, and still is, incredibly outlandish. Even if Gareth had locked himself in the bag, there would have been evidence of him trying to get out when he realized he was suffocating. But there were no scratch marks by the zipper or on his fingers. Given that there was no DNA at the crime scene, besides what was left by police later on, that would mean that Gareth had maliciously cleaned the room while in the bag, not to mention the heating in the home at the time. But officially, this is where this case ends. There are a number of conspiracy theories as to what happened to Gareth, which all cannot be proven. Multiple people who claim to be former MI6 agents, FBI agents, and SVR agents have all come forward to different media outlets and claimed that they know how and why Gareth was killed. Due to the nature of these claims, they cannot be fact-checked, and most of them have been relayed entirely uncritically, which I will try not to do on this channel, but it seems, due to the lack of answers in the case, these theories bring people comfort. One of the most well-known and widely believed theories was that Gareth was killed by a Russian hitman after refusing to sell out his country to work with the Russians. This theory came about in 2015 when former KGB agent Boris Karpachov came forward and claimed that he had direct knowledge about what had happened. Boris defected to the UK in 1998, turning his back on his former comrades by informing British intelligence about the innermost workings of the KGB. He claimed that Gareth had been approached by Russian foreign intelligence, also known as the SVR, and they attempted to blackmail him into becoming a double agent. Gareth refused them outright and purposely told them that he had plans to expose one of their agents who was working undercover within the GCHQ. This action then, according to Boris, signed his death warrant. His adamant refusal alongside his threat of exposing their agent led to a hit being put out on him, and his name being dragged through the mud after his death. At the time of the murders, Boris lived in the same general area as Gareth, and he claimed that he took note of multiple suspicious vehicles being near Gareth's home. The men inside these vehicles seemed to be casing the area, and for a while, Boris believed a hit had been put on his head as well, given his defecting. But after William's death, he realized what had happened. However, there is no way to verify the validity of these claims, and it's equally possible that Boris is lying. Regardless as to why he was killed, Gareth dedicated his life to protecting others, working an incredibly difficult and demanding job, and deserves to be remembered that way. If you've made it to this portion in the video, thank you for watching. This was one of the more frustrating videos to research, as the reporting on this case is incredibly strange, but I hope you enjoyed it regardless. If you liked this video, consider leaving a like and subscribing, and remember to stay safe.